Hello, welcome back to LIVENODING. In this episode, I want to share with you this node tree setup. Basically created using geometry nodes and also shader nodes. So let's take a look very quickly. If I turn off the render, you can see that this guy is becoming much simpler, and this guy is also a lot simpler. This is using EV, and this is the base mesh. Alright, so yeah, it's looking a little bit like Ironman Heart or like a UFO. This was actually inspired by a post by Benny Govaerts. So again, it's using this one. This one is using geometry nodes by default. And if you take a look at the nodes, it might seem complicated, but after you study this, try to rebuild this from scratch. And I also asked Benny, what's the original mesh geometry, and he said that it is actually like a cone that has been flattened. And what he's doing here with the Voronoi texture, he's using the U and the V value from UV map inside geometry nodes with a little bit of math, multiply, fractions, and color ramp combined together, and using it as a vector for Voronoi. And then so anyway, it generates this type of geometry. So in my case, I try the same setup using geometry nodes. I follow most of them. I didn't do anything like Benny at the back, but yeah, the same setup both in geometry nodes and also in shader nodes. You cannot just copy and paste the nodes because they're different, but by trying to create this yourself using both shader and geometry nodes, you can definitely understand what's going on. So using the UV, separating it into XYZ, and using the X and the Y value, and with combinations of this multiplier, fractions, and color ramp, you're gonna get an interesting result. So this guy is slightly weird and complex because I'm using displacement of shader both together with the geometry nodes setup. Let me actually just reduce the complexity for a bit. I'm actually turning on the experimental and micro displacement. I'm gonna turn that off for now. And okay, we have the basic original geometry, right? It's much simpler. And like I said, this one was originally just a flat cone shape that has been flattened. With the top, we just get rid of the fill, so it's hollow. This guy is already extruded. So with the geometry nodes setup, with this multiplier, fractions, color ramp, combined Voronoi, yeah, we actually have extrude and scale. So it's done twice with some displacement. So it gives us these shapes that look like a UFO. I use mirror as well, but originally it's just looking like this. I just mirror it so it's looking like UFO. Yeah, I think it's kind of neat looking shape. And this was actually generated on the fly using the displacement shader. If you don't believe me, so as I change this value, you can get this type of like a flower type of design. So based on the cone and the UV, the way the UV get laid out, you can get this result. I think it's really quite neat setup, and something you have to try yourself and study to understand what's going on. I can go higher, and then other than this, also there's an additional value. This one to kind of like randomize the noise. It's adding the noise, actually adding more details to the shapes. So that's doing it in the shader because it's displacing it when you render it using cycles. So if yeah, I guess I don't need to explain too much. You basically need to download this and then try to recreate it yourself. I have another example, which is, yeah, okay, this is the setup, just a different variations based on the same setup. This time it's possible because I'm using sphere chalk, and I just grab all these objects into sphere chalk and then changing the value of the seed. So we have 50 variants here, and each one of them has slightly different, but the underneath is all pretty much the same. I can delete all of these. Let's take a look at one design. So from the cone shape that has been flattened, we subdivide it first, right? So this is the subdivision level. Let's try level 2. You can play around with decrease, nothing much changes. First there's this extrusions, and there's also the second extrusion, so twice extrusion. The one is doing the funky stuff is this selections, and the selection is getting the value from our Voronoi that has has been processed. So the UV map, first of all, we need to have some kind of UV map. So the UV map is there by default if you create like a cone shapes and then flatten it, and then you bring it into geometry nodes, and then you separate the X and Y, and we do this stuff. There's 2 value controlling the subdivisions. And that's, I think, the seed, randomizing it. We can also play around with the Z-axis, but anyway, the Voronoi, let's see, I think smaller value is nice. You can play around with the scale and randomness. Okay, this is the W value actually. Yeah, this is also changing the pattern. The reason that this is working because of the UV is actually going around the cone in circular shapes. So we have this result. I think it's really quite neat. And if we create duplicates, this is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is 24. Just get the selections, bring it into sphere chalk, and we're gonna change the value using these nodes. Just reload. We have different design. Yeah, you don't need to use sphere chalk. I mean, at some point you can just use geometry nodes and then just manually change the design using this value. So it's totally up to you. You can also use Python, or you can just plug in like a frame number. You can have different design for every frame. That's using the drivers. So what else I haven't explained? I think that's explained most of the things. There are a few other things. Okay, the scale also, this is nice. This is using sine wave to modulate the scaling. And this is also controlling the scale. It's really creates the like an Ironman Heart, or I like just to think of it like a UFO shapes, like a flower. But it's really beautiful example by Benny. and definitely you give it a try yourself and see how if you can use the same setup and do it multiple times, like iteratively. I don't recommend you to do that because it might be really heavy. So if we go back to the original example here, so I'm using cycles, turning on the experimental, and we can use the adaptive subdivisions, right? It's doing the micro displacement. That's why we are getting this result because I'm using the geometry nodes and also the shader nodes of the same setup, more or less. Maybe the scale is too high. Just reduce the scale so we still have a little bit of details going on with this. I think the result is quite nice, rather nice. And if you want to see, before you do the displacement, if you just want to see the color, sometimes you want to do this. So you have this Voronoi texture thing happening, and you just want to take a look what is the pattern that's displacing our mesh. It's looking like this. So you can control the details. I'm not like 100% like understand the shader. I know a little bit. Maybe my level is like intermediate or even like just basic. But with some knowledge of shaders, it should help you with the understanding of geometry nodes. So I was trying to do the displacement, but we can't really see it. Let's plug this back. Okay, displacement is back. Maybe this color can go into our object. Oh yeah, it's a bit colorful, but it's interesting. Instead I'm using this ambient occlusions, so the color, okay, color can go there. Yeah, it's a bit cartoony at the moment. Voronoi is super interesting. Oh yeah, by the way, I think it's choosing Chebyshev or Minkowski with the subdivisions. That's why it was looking completely different before, different than expected. But there's a lot of parameters you can play with. There we go. It's looking a little bit more interesting, and also okay, scale the W value. So every value that you change will give a different design. It's starting to resemble one of the like anime robots cartoon. Oh well, yeah, I think it's really fun thing you can try to build yourself. Don't be afraid with that. So many things happening. You basically the knowledge that you need to know how to bring in the UV value and how to separate the UV value in X and Y, and then you play around with multiplier. You use the fractions, vector math here, use the color ramp. You need to know all this basic knowledge, and then you can rebuild the shader displacement or the geometry nodes like this. Alright, so thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.